Hi everybody, thanks very much for joining us today. In particular, welcome to the students who are taking part in the CARCASS 2021 kitchen design project. Today we're going to be talking about kitchen carcassing and doors, and we're very lucky to have Bylin from Spotlight Joinery and Andy de Klerk from Cabinet Works with us today, and they're going to help take us through the subject matter and tell us a little bit about kitchen carcassing and doors. So let's start by looking at kitchen carcasses, which are really the backbone of the kitchen. They're the structural integrity of the kitchen. So it's quite important that we get those right. Andy, do you want to start by taking us through the different types of construction methods for a kitchen carcass?
For sure. So let's see. So as Steph said, the heart of the kitchen is the carcasses, and if they need to be put together accurately, they need to be put together strongly, then the connections need to be good. And essentially, if you start out with a bad or a weak connection and incorrectly cut panels, you're going to fight everything down the line. Your doors won't hang straight, and so it all starts out with the connections. So obviously the first one is where the kitchen cabinet components are just nailed together. It's not very strong, but it does get it together. Then you can rebate it. So there's a way that it locks together and nail it. And we don't like doing that in our industry just because nails aren't very strong. So you can do the same thing, but you can screw it. But what we like to use is a conformat screw, which is made in Germany, and they're bulletproof. There's a special drill bit that goes in. So we would typically use a nail gun to pin the corners, 2 nails, and then we would pre-drill and we would use the screws. That's fine if it's all done by hand. When you get into mass production and volume production of kitchens, there's furniture hardware that's been developed for it, such that you can have a machine drill holes, and then there's these very clever connectors that you can put them together, and they've got an offset cam. And so when you come to assemble the cases, the side and a base or a top locks together with a screwdriver. You make a half a turn with a screw and it locks it in place. Then the cheap way is with little plastic corner connectors, just with screws. Again, that's not very good. A third way of doing it with, if you've got the industrial machinery with multiple boring drills, you can use dowels. That's quite often used in German cabinetry because it's extremely accurate, and it's doweled and glued. And then if you just can maybe go to the next page, Steph. Moving on to sort of the more higher end joinery, which takes longer. When you put things together, there's a hand machine called a domino machine that's taken over from the biscuits, and what you're doing is putting a little feather or a tenon in, and then those are locked together with glue, and they need to be clamped. The one advantage of using dominoes or glues, that's what you use when you have visible end panels, so there's no fixings that can be seen. Similarly, rebated and glued, tongue and groove and glued, dovetailed or mitered and glued. These are all more advanced woodworking techniques that you use for a sort of standard application. Maybe just a few of these would get used, but most of them would be done with the Rafix connectors or the dowels. And it just depends on the level of the kitchen, quality, depends on the level of the kitchen price. It depends on whether you're doing 1 or you're doing 100 million. So there's many ways to put it together, but the key is the connections have to be strong. Over to you, Steph.
Thanks, Andy. So let's move on to the next thing. Bo, if you want to just maybe take us through what are the different types of materials that can be used to make a kitchen or a carcass, and what happens when it comes to color? Do we use it? Don't we use it? And then what are the cost implications?
Sure, Steph. So I would say the 99% of the carcasses that are currently being manufactured on the market are a stock standard white melamine that have a chipboard inner core and that is a standard 16mm sheet. It is by far the cheapest board on the market, just relative to the volume that is being manufactured by the likes of PG Bison and so on. So a stock standard carcass in terms of entry-level cabinet would be a white melamine carcass with a 3mm masonite backer that will be either nailed or panel pinned onto the back, or otherwise a slot would be run in the sides and the base in order for the backing to slide in. Moving up a notch, should clients want to go with something slightly nicer than a white melamine, we would generally go with a Folkestone grey, which we consider a light grey. It just gives a really nicer element when you open up your cupboards. It also matches some of your silver hardware a lot better in terms of your runners and things like that. Or we'll go with the Storm Grey, which is very much a charcoal type colour. Also works very, very well with your anthracite runners. And black, those are all on the same tier with regards to moving up from a white melamine to Folkestone Grey, Storm Grey or black. Just very important to understand that is purely cosmetics. From a board structure, it is still the same chipboard inner core. It's purely the outer melamine that has got a different color. Then if your client is wanting to have a nice wood texture on the inside, but still wanting to go with a cheaper board, they can go with a melamine textured board. Again, it has a melamine inner core, and it will be edged according to the actual board itself, or potentially matched to the door color on the outside. But what it does do once the cupboard is fully stocked, to someone sitting away from the kitchen, if you open up a cupboard and you see a wood texture on there, you would struggle to see that it's not potentially with a newer textured board, you'd struggle to see that it's not really a real wood. It's just a really nicer way of doing things. Then tier 3, I would say this is moving on to more your high-end joinery, where your clients have really enjoyed some more luxury items. You would be going on to your oak veneers, walnut veneers. This can either have an MDF substructure, it can have a chipboard substructure as well. But the veneers and boards that come out would need to be upgraded with regards to edging onto it, solids, possibly even going veneer over edge. The thicknesses can vary from a 16mm, 18mm, 22 up to 27 or 32mm. In terms of your veneers, you can gladly use any one of those as a substrate. Spray painting, whether it's a water-based spray or an AC lacquer spray, you can use any color under the sun. You can color match to absolutely anything. And whether or not spray and your client's wanting a bit of texture, you're welcome to hand paint as well with brush strokes, the likes of or rollers. And then, should your client be able to afford it, something really nice to upgrade to is a spruce ply, a marine ply. There's some really, really nice ply boards that sometimes have beautiful detailing in terms of striped effects on the side of the actual boards. I've actually got a sample here of a really nice spruce ply, forgive me, a really nice birch ply board with an oak veneer pressed onto it, and you can see that beautiful detailing in the edges. A lot of our clients sometimes like to see that detailing. And should your clients want the creme de la creme, well, there's nothing better than a solid timber carcass, but it's incredibly, incredibly expensive. Probably work, I would guess, in the ballpark of 8 to 10 times more expensive than a standard melamine carcass. Again, remember that's in its raw form. You'd be getting in raw planks, and you'd need to upgrade and start laminating all of these solid timber components together in order to create your panels, as well as your tongue and groove backings, those types of things. And as Abby said, there are a number of ways of putting the carcasses together. But serious luxury for generally very wealthy clients. Moving on to the edging. Like I said to you earlier, your standard board there's your white melamine board with your chipboard inner core. This is generally, when you cut through it, always exposed, and you ultimately need to apply an edge an edge is available in a number of thicknesses, colors, those types of things. Generally, it will come in for a melamine board, it will be a PVC edge, or it can come in a number of thicknesses. A really, really cheap edge is a 0.6 mil edge, and then it will move up to a 1 mil, 1.3, and can go up to 2 mil, or even a 3 mil. And then on your veneers, if you're going with a veneered board and you're needing to put an edge on it, we'll use a 2 millimeter impact edge. These boards would ultimately go through what we'd call a machine called an edge bander, and where it would heat that glue up, and it would apply pressure with rollers to adhere the edging to the board, and then it will have a little router that will cut that edging off. Whether it's got a bigger, thicker edge, you could run a little router on and give you a very, very small radius. Again, then moving up to the more high end, whether you're going veneer over edge or you're wanting to apply a solid edge to your carcass, you could generally specify anywhere from a 6, 10, even a 20 mil solid edge to some of your carcasses. Yeah, I think that's it, Edge. Steph. Then in terms of weatherproofing cabinets, so your standard chipboard is not suitable for an exterior application or an area with high humidity. If you're potentially exporting to Nigeria, the Seychelles, something like that, there we would need to upgrade the board to either a ply of sorts, a waterproof ply, whether it is the marine ply, which is a really, really marine grade board, and really, really useful for exterior grade purposes. That again would have to get upgraded, whether you're going to spray that marine ply board, leave it in its raw form, or even upgrade it to with a PVC foil that gets pressed over it as if it was a veneer. That's another option for something with really, really strong exterior qualities. And then forgive me, I've forgotten to mention the new board on the market, which is the gyro/PVC foam board. Hasn't really been used much on the local market as yet. It's quite expensive, but it seems to be picking up and becoming more popular for sink cupboards, bathroom cupboards, those types of areas that are taking on some water.
Thanks, Bo. Andy, when it comes to the installation of a kitchen of kitchen carcassing, what is the process and what are the implications if things go wrong with it or it's not done correctly?
Okay, well, you can make the greatest kitchen in your factory, and if it's not installed properly and it doesn't work in your customer's house, you've kind of shot yourself in the foot and they won't pay. So it's very important. Because basically an installation is the manifestation of whatever you do behind the scenes in your factory. So it all starts out with accuracy. The cabinets can't be trapezoidal, they've got to be square, and they because if the cabinets aren't square, then the drawers don't run properly, and if the cabinets aren't square, then the doors will never hang properly, and you'll never be able to line it up with that crisp little 3 millimeter gap all around. So then basically out of the workshop, out of the factory, onto site will get delivered these square boxes with, we use a tolerance of, 0.1, 0.2 of a millimeter, 0.2 of a millimeter. When your saw blades get dull, it's something like, there's a small margin, but it's not, we're not talking about even a 1/4 of a millimeter. So on site, these boxes arrive, and now you've got to install them into a very irregular building. Houses and floors, walls, and ceilings are never plumb. Exactly, they are never square, they're never level, and basically now you have to accommodate for that. So there's different ways of that kitchen cabinet companies start, and it starts on the floor. They have these black adjustable feet that are screwed to the bottom of the cabinet that can basically level out your carcasses. We don't use that. We use marine ply plinths, so it's a much more solid base. But even those plinths have to get they have to get leveled with wedges and get it all correct. But it starts out with your plinths being leveled. So what you've done is you've allowed for an irregular and uneven floor. So now you've got a flat plinth base, or the same can be said once you put your case on with the black feet, you level those out and you've found your starting out point. You always have a set out point where you start, and it's generally got something to do with alignment to something else. So often if you start in the wrong place and you come to where you ended, you sort of realize that you shouldn't have started there. You should have started in another place, and you have to undo it all. So once you've got a level plinth down, you put these square cases on, and generally they are screwed together. Sometimes they're just screwed anywhere, and then there's little white stickers that go on. What we like to do, we like to take the hinge plates off. You unscrew one and you put a secret screw in behind the hinge, or you take a drawer runner off and you screw behind the drawer runner, so that when you open the door or the drawer, you don't see any visible fixings. Then that's to get all of the cabinet runs fixed together, so it's nice and strong and it's level. And now you need to pin it to the wall, and there's several European ways of doing that. What we like to do is just in the top corners of each base unit, or behind shelves if it's a wall unit, we put express anchors that go into the wall, or if it's a brick wall, or just normal screws if it's into drywall where the studs are, or tech screws if it's into steel studs. So now you've got a level, basically you've got a level run of cabinets that's securely fixed to the wall, and it needs to be level so that all the hardware works nicely, the doors can be aligned, the stone needs a flat, secure, level surface to put on, because there's no tolerance in that. If you, let's say, when you first start out, the thing you need to do on an installation is to determine the high points and what's out. So in addition to having your setting out point, you should figure out where the high spot is, and you start there and work out. And if a wall is badly out of plumb, you start with the furthermost out point and start there. Because if you pay attention and you do things systematically and methodically, you can get a very perfectly installed kitchen that's level, plumb, and square. And if that's the case, then you can clip on the doors, all the margins are right, basically everything works. If you start out with something if you start out with something that's not level or square, and you think, oh, it doesn't matter, it always bites you in the end, where you cannot get a door to line up or something doesn't work. And also another very important part is when you design a kitchen, you start with the appliances, and the manufacturers of the appliances give a great detail and dimensions and requirements for ventilation and requirements for power and water and whatever, and you have to listen to those. We always start any kitchen design with the appliances that have been chosen, and we build the cabinets exactly like the manufacturer recommends. And almost all of the integrated appliances require quite specific ventilation, and the cabinetry has to be designed for that. And if you do it properly and you pay attention, and you get all these prerequisites right, there should be no comebacks from the client, because they can see it's a perfectly installed kitchen, it's well done, it's going to last. And it's just one of those things. If quality starts in the factory and it moves onto site, the kitchen cabinet manufacturers can stand behind their warranty, whether it's 1 year or 10 years or a lifetime, and so on. Thanks. Next one.
Thanks, Andy. And funny enough, just thinking about what you were saying there about how important the leveling is. and knowing exactly how to get that right, because the reality is that we actually go onto very few sites where the walls and floors are in square. So it is something that you need to know how to do and get it right, because if you're relying on the walls and the floor to help you out there, you might be severely disappointed. Right, so let's move on to cupboard doors and what's involved with them. So let's start, Bo, with you, just to take us through what are the different ways of making up a door.
Sure. So, Steph, I think we'll start with the cheapest ones. The slide that you're currently showing on the screen is your typical wood-grained melamine door. And you can actually see, if you have a look at that edge, that there, with the grain direction change, that the edge has been applied to the door. So, like I said earlier, the chipboard is loaded into one side of the machine, and the roll of edging is loaded into another one. Basically, with the aid of rollers and a conveyor, the glue is applied to the edging, and it's heated up, should I say, generally at about 180 degrees, somewhere around there, and then applied to the board and the edging, and with the aid of rollers, it then runs through the edging machine and ultimately gets cut. This one you can see has got a very small radius on it. So this radius, where you don't see the timber grain, it's more that grade effect. That is what I was chatting to you a little bit earlier about, a router that ends up trimming that edging off and gives that door round melamine edge a small radius. Just finishes the door a lot nicely. Also, there'll be a cutter at the end of the run that will cut that edging off. Generally, as a rule of thumb, you edge your short sides first and your long sides secondly. So that's entry level, stock standard for the masses, which is a 16 millimeter melamine board, whether you go with a flat white, folkestone grey, or you can upgrade it slightly to a nice textured board like this. Moving away from that are the likes of the Niman boards. There's Fenix. There are so many laminates that can be applied, for micas that can be applied, just depending on the durability and wear and tear and the look that your client is trying to achieve. There are so many laminations that can be applied to various substrates to give you a look and feel of your client. Again, these laminates are generally flat pressed, and you would still need to apply an edge in a very similar form to the actual board. Then moving on from that, you get upgrading one more is a stock standard cutting edge oak or veneered board of any shape and form. It generally goes onto a 16 millimeter substrate of chipboard, and then a book matched oak veneer or walnut veneer or any type of veneer. Crown sapele would be applied to either side of the board. Those veneers are generally 0.6 of a mil, hence the veneer board being 1 millimeter thicker than the melamine boards. Yeah, still very, very nice. Just if you're going with a stock standard cutting edge board, we are generally limited to the board size of 2.7 by 1.8. Then moving up from there is your a typical PVC wrap board. This is a PVC foil that is heated up and vacuum pressed onto an MDF substrate. These images on the left-hand side clearly indicate a number of different profiles, rebates, recesses. The top one shows a raised and filled panel where the actual detail is CNC'd into the board itself, and then the PVC wrap is vacuum formed and pressed onto that board. These boards are, the one downfall with these boards is generally it's a single-faced MDF board which has a white backer, a white melamine backer, and then in the front of your board would be your typical PVC face. Also, these PVC wraps are available in a number of colors, textures, finishes. Yeah, not hugely used, but still there is still a big demand on more of your entry level to mid market for the PVC wrap. Moving on for some other doors, should your client want to introduce some glass and some metal elements, there are your typical Vogue profiles. which is manufactured. This is the back of the door that I'm showing you. All the corners are mited and are joined with joining strips inside the actual doors themselves. Some of the profiles have special rebates to accommodate various colors and thicknesses of glass, and a really, really nice option for your clients, whether they're going with a stainless steel look, anodized aluminium. You can even upgrade them, have them powder coated. They are a really, really nice way of introducing some color, some display cabinets into the actual kitchen itself. Alrighty, some of the other doors that we tend to do. A spray door is generally quite an expensive option. You have got the option of going with a single-faced spray door with a white melamine internal, and then your color of your spray can be absolutely anything. Generally, our paint suppliers can color match to anything. And there we would use a stock standard handle. Again, the amount of handles that are on the market are absolutely endless. Nowadays, clients are trying to push more towards less handles and more finger grips. So the second image of the white finger grip, which is actually either run through a spindle molder, if it runs right the way through the drawer itself, or otherwise it can be run with a hand router. We find that a 22mm thick door to run a finger grip works far nicer on the fingers versus a 16mm door. It just comes down to price again. Also, reverse chamfer in the third image. This is generally when we would use what we call a gola rail, which is a finger grip channel that is machined out of the actual carcass itself. And then so this stays behind when the doors and drawers are actually opened. And you can have a chamfer or router, a small little rebate onto the back of your door in order to get them to open and close. The finger grip is also available in a plunged router handle. It doesn't have to run the full length or width of the door or drawer. You're able to come up with a number of designs, various depths, various thicknesses on. You can even plunge router the actual handle into the center of the door should you want. There are many ways of doing it. It just depends on how creative you're wanting to be. Then the last one is ultimately what type of profile you're wanting to router into a door. MDF is generally, will always come in a flat panel format, and you're able to run many different rebates into the doors. The only problem is if you run too many grooves and you cut too many slots through the one face of the MDF panel door, the door generally tends to bend towards your cuts. So you just need to be mindful of how many slots and grooves you're wanting to cut into the one face of the door without strengthening it on the back side. Yeah, Steph, I think that basically covers those. Going more towards a solid door. This is what we would call a 5-piece shaker door. This is more towards we'll generally make a solid timber door this way. It is probably the most stable way of keeping a solid door in check so that it doesn't end up buckling, bending. You're going to struggle to make a stock standard solid solid door, flat panel door, without giving it some form of support on the back. So this is the way of keeping a solid timber door in check and in shape. It's made up of 5 different panels, two rails, 2 styles, and then you've got your recessed shaker frame. We would run rebates in the rails, and then you've got your tongue on your tongue on the other little components, and then the whole door, it comes together and gets clamped. There's another option of doing the dowels, which you can see in the lower image down below. Should you wanting to make a shaker or farm style, country style door out of a typical melamine or another laminate, that's another option. People also, this is still very popular amongst people going with this farm style, country style shaker look. So the option of doing that in a sprayed MDF or board without any texture is very, very popular, believe it or not, should you not want to go the contemporary route. The shaker is also, sorry, Steph, the shaker is also available down the bottom. Should you want to bring in some other detailing, what we call that center panel, we call it a raised and fielded panel, and you're able to give it a bit more detailing by routering either a chamfer or a curved rebate around the side. Yeah. Then different door methods in terms of construction. So a lot of the time for more of our high-end clients, our clients would want a veneer over edge door where the door is actually manufactured with solids all around the substrate, and then the veneer is pressed over it. What you can achieve then is you can, sorry, I just want to steal the slide out. What you can do then is you can, depending on the size solids that you put on the actual door itself, you are able to run various handle details, rebates in the veneer, but it still looks like a solid timber door, and is very, very popular. Often what happens is what we like to call grain match. A client would like a run of their cupboards to appear as one single log, and you are able to, when you have it veneered, line all those door fronts up in their exact formats and have that grain running from left to right all the way over. Again, you are limited not only, well, you're not limited by the board, but you are limited by how your tree grows and how often your walnut trees will not grow nearly as high as your oak trees. So sometimes you just need to check with regards to your supplier what your maximum lengths on your veneer leaves are. Then going over onto your compact laminates, whether it's some form of a Corian or a Phoenix, again, can be pressed onto a number of substrates, whether you're wanting to put on a nice different detailed edge, or whether you're wanting to actually do a Phoenix edge, something like that. Again, that would go through the cut and edge process. Some of the really nice qualities about Phoenix is that it's non-marking and you don't end up with fingerprints on it, and can really give you a really beautiful dead matte look in a kitchen, which is becoming very, very popular.
Thanks, Bo. Right, so obviously with all those different methods of construction, there are different cost implications. Andy, do you want to just take us through how the costs vary depending on what you choose?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so if you're looking for a budget entry level, it's just raw chipboard with a PVC edge. Those are the sort of things that you can find in, the DIY home stores. Generally they use for sort of garage cupboards, but not really inside, but they really, really are cheap. And then it's a case of you get what you pay for. As Bo said, the vast majority of kitchen cabinets and wardrobe cabinets and things in South Africa are chipboard with a melamine facing on it and a PVC edge. I'd say, you reckon 99%, I think probably 90%, maybe 95%, but that's the vast majority. And again, all these things, the more you upgrade them, the more expensive they are. I'm not going to go into the costs or anything, but it depends on the customer and the client's budget and everything, and how it goes on. So there's various what's the right word? There's various variants on the way you can use chipboard or MDF, and the PVC edge and the foil wrap. These the cost implications for line number 2, 3, 4, and 5 are generally pretty similar, representing sort of the low to the middle end of the market. And we find in our work often when, even with high-end kitchens and things, just the cost of high-end carcassing and using plywood and veneers it just tips it over. So we'll go back to using the colored MDFs, which look quite nice, and if done correctly, they will last. There's a new Lansdowne Boards has just started doing something very interesting. They're taking MDF and they're powder coating it, which is, they claim is completely waterproof, which it is, except for the holes where they need to hang it for the powder coating. So you may just watch that space. I think that could become quite interesting. We haven't used it. I would like to try it. We use a lot of powder coated steel in our work, and but I've never tried it with the MDF. That's just an aside. Then the last three items are, moving up into the much higher bracket of cost. LVL stands for laminated veneer lumber, and it's generally a 3-ply board made of solid timber, usually spruce or oak, and it's manufactured in a big factory in Europe, and then you cut it up and you make it into carcasses or doors or whatever. There you go. Thanks, Bo. That's it. And it's a very interesting material because it's flat and stable and strong, but obviously there's a cost involved. Then just underneath solid timber, which is for kitchens, generally just used for the doors, but not for the carcasses. Just before that, you'll get the plywoods, birch ply. Generally the plywood needs to be flat, both sides. Often it's an A and a B side, which means the B side isn't quite as good as the A side, but they generally flat enough for veneering. And the cost goes up there, and then obviously right at the top is the solid timber. Cost-wise, it depends on the client's wishes, depends on what they want. We find that our clients often want the moon, but the budget isn't quite that much, and generally jiggling these things around, using a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you can generally come up with a good design within a cost-effective budget. So that's up to the designer.
Thanks, Andy.
Next slides. Thanks.
Right, Bo, so let's look at sort of installing your doors. What's the process and what do you have to watch out for?
Yeah, sure, Steph. So I think, as Andy mentioned earlier, the installation of your foundation or your carcasses is critical to the overall look and feel in terms of the finish of your doors. If your doors aren't lining up and your drawers aren't closing properly, it really gives the kitchen a cheap and nasty feel. So when it comes down to, not only are these the cosmetic panels that you add to the kitchen, it is critical that these are fitted correctly. Most of our hardware suppliers on the market generally supply us with jigs, and what these jigs help you do is they help you line up the drawer fronts or the hinges exactly with the positions on the actual carcass itself. They'll generally clip into the actual runners themselves. They'll have 4 little points, and what you're able to do is line your drawer front up perfectly without having to clamp it, press it up against these little sharp points, and they'll leave little markings for you in terms of where these items should get screwed and fixed, or however they're getting fastened to the actual substrate. Then, in terms of handling these doors, most of the doors and these cosmetic items in the kitchen are really high and they cost a lot. So what must be considered is how these are being transported, who's all handling them, how they're being stored. They need to be stored correctly so they don't start bending, these types of things if they're going to be stored for long periods of time. Most of our doors are packaged individually, and we'll either put them in a plastic sleeve or with some urethane bubble wrap. Should we be exporting them, we'll either crate them up or put them in cardboard as well. But always, corner protectors are always really good, and it's really important that these items are looked after. Some of your more PVC wrap items and those type of things that come from suppliers, generally those PVC wraps will come with a protective foil over them. Those are kept on right until the end, and then they can literally get peeled off like contact paper and cleaned off. The little glue marks can get cleaned off the actual PVC themselves. Often with veneers and things like that, if you're putting a clear spray over them, whether it's a polyurethane or just a satin clear, the challenge that you have, should someone bump the edge of that satin clear spray work, it generally marks white, which is often a big challenge. Or sometimes if you're spraying a charcoal, your high body base coats and things like that are generally white or clear coat. Once if you chip that corner or damage that corner or the edge of a potential door, you need to be sending it back to your spray booth for a respray. Often really difficult to get an exact match. It comes down to your mixing ratios. It comes down to adding extra layers of paint. Often very challenging. We would generally try and respray the full bank. Should we have to respray certain elements. Often just to eliminate damage, certain contractors don't know how to handle your goods on site. Often on our building sites, there are a lot of trades that are still on site: plumbers, electricians, granite guys. The worst is ceiling guys still having to skim above cabinetry and stuff, but that's worst case scenario. Then you generally want your doors and drawer fronts to be fitted right at the end after your stone has gone in order to ensure that none of these items are getting damaged and the traffic is just limited. If you can corner off these areas so that other trades aren't welcome when you're busy in there, it's always a good thing to do. And then do a handover with your client or your builder and wrap up before you leave those spaces. Yeah, building sites tend to get interesting.
Thanks, bye.
Then, with regards to doors and drawers with misaligned, with incorrect fitting of them, often it will all next. I mean, it's pretty obvious with our game. Like Andy said, we would generally like to have a nice, clean, consistent 3 to 4 millimeter gap all the way around all the doors. All your doors and drawers should generally finish flush up against your carcass and press up against some things. Your hardware generally gives you adjustments left, right, up and down, tilt backwards and forwards. So there should be no reason for this not to happen, provided your kitchen's been designed correctly or your cabinetry's been designed correctly. So yeah, often common mistakes: misalignment, your hardware not engaging, and your soft closing mechanisms not closing properly. Your doors get to a certain point and tend to stop if your hinges are out of alignment, as well as if your drawers and carcasses are out of square or if they've been twisted. Sometimes if your drawer fronts are not aligned, they'll rub up against your corner post, your worktops, possibly bump into an appliance, worst case scenario. And then the most tricky ones often are your integrated appliances. It's not, these again are for more high-end clients that like to have a more of a furniture-looking kitchen where you do not see appliances like your fridges, like your dishwashers, those types of things, and freezers. You are able to actually apply a normal timber door to the front of the actual appliance themselves. Those come with very detailed fitting instructions by the specific appliance manufacturer. So for the best result, generally your doors and drawer fronts need to be fitted 100% correctly and to ensure a really high-end product, and gives you confidence in handing the kitchen over to your clients. Thanks,
Bo. So yeah, that kind of brings our primary discussion up to a conclusion, but I know Karen's been sitting just jotting down some questions for you guys that probably would also help that we run through. Kies, do you want to take over there?
Thanks so much. So there are a couple of questions, and I'm just going to lay all my papers out here. So the first item we covered in the presentation was carcassing. So I know we chatted about all the different items available. So the biggest thing for me is, or questions that come from clients is wet areas. I mean, I think insurance companies are inundated with claims for sink units. Is there any specific material that you would suggest preferably be used over your normal melamine carcassing? Maybe Bo, you can answer that, or Andy, whoever.
Yeah, sure.
So basically, in the wet areas, a sink will always leak. No matter what you do, someone will leave the tap on, no matter what kind of sink you have, and it will always overflow. The plumbing always leaks over time. So the thing is to design a kitchen for longer than 10 years, because we found that melamine in a sink unit lasts 10 years or less before it's got to get replaced. So what we do in our kitchens is wherever there's a sink cupboard or any wet area, we'll use birch plywood. If the carcasses are adjacent to it are white, we'll spray it. If they're grey, we'll spray at that, but we always use birch plywood, which is water resistant, not waterproof. But you know, you can have water pouring down it for days and days and days, and it dries out and it keeps functioning. And that really goes a long way to keeping for the longevity of a kitchen.
Thanks so much. And I mean, that can also then be used for bathroom vanities as well. It's not only restricted for a sink unit in a kitchen.
Yeah, sure. All our bathroom vanities are always birch ply, and all the sink units for kitchens are always birch ply.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Use marine ply, those other waterproof boards, but birch ply is pretty easy and it's probably the most cost effective.
Yeah. Karen, it's generally, I mean, Andy's talking more high end here, and yes, that is an ideal situation. The majority of clients can only afford a white melamine carcass. I think what's really important is that the joiner or fabricator is building modular carcasses that should anything happen with the water itself, that potentially it's contained to that particular unit, and only that unit is then replaced with all the water flowing out onto the floor. As a cheap quick fix, some manufacturers do offer an aluminium tray that can go fit on the bottom, whether it's aluminium, perspex, steel, that can actually capture the water. It's got a slight fold up that will generally guide and aid the water once it's stripped down out the front of the cabinet. Still not an ideal situation, but yeah, Andy's solution is a really nice solution. It's just very expensive.
Thanks. And then one of the carcass materials you spoke again, high-end stuff, Bo, was the using solid timber. I know this is more widely used in Europe and UK. My question is, when laminating, first of all, laminating all the shelving together and even the sides, all that kind of thing, is there a specific timber that you would suggest rather using it? So like pine versus beech, and what kind of risk is there with regards to warping or bowing of that material? Yeah. How stable is it?
Sure. So look, I mean, in terms of your carcassing and solid timbers, you can potentially use any timber that is available. It just depends on your client's expectations and what the usage is going to be for. Understand a lot of the timbers, like your pines and things like that, are incredibly soft. So should your client not mind a ding over time with a from a pot or something like that in your pines and those type of softer timbers, it might be perfectly adequate for a client. When going with something more high-end, whether it be a walnut or an oak or something like that, your sides of your carcasses, because they are going to be supported structurally by your base and your top, you can generally flat laminate, and that's available. You can laminate in a number of different ways. The biggest challenge, it comes down to your grain direction of your timber, and then also your backing. Your backing is generally the one that would push with expanding and contraction, would generally push your carcass or pull your carcass in or out. So generally, for a solid timber type unit, you would potentially want to use a tongue and grooved effect to give you allowance for a bit of movement. So I hope that answers the question. I don't know if I covered absolutely everything there.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. No, that's perfect. Thanks. Andy, we were chatting about installation, and there were the emphasis on everything being square and level is quite high there, obviously. So for me, from kitchen sales background and having a bit of installation knowledge, I always seem to find that there's a bit of a breakdown in the team when the installation starts. What does the relationship need to be like? How much detail should the salesperson be taking note of in terms of structural obstructions, or if flooring or walls are very out of plumb? Should they be there during the installation, or should they literally just put their plan together, give it to the factory, and the rest is the installation team's problem to deal with? What are your feelings on that relationship? What does it need to work like?
Yeah, okay. It depends on the structure of the company. If you've got a salesperson designing a kitchen for a client and they're using Winner or 2020 or whatever the program is, and it just spits it out, it goes to the factory, and then it goes to site, and then it becomes the installer's problem. So if the salesperson has missed a part, or they've got a height wrong, or they've got some obstruction that they haven't seen, then the poor installers have to cut it out and make a plan on site. That's the general way to do it. We do it a little bit differently, and we do it somewhere in between. On the far side are the European imported kitchen companies like Bulltop and so on and so on. They check everything on site, and if the walls are 2 millimeters out of plumb, they don't even start installing. So they make sure that the site is ready for them. Every single thing is exactly where they want it, and if it's not, the builders must change it. So you get the sort of handoff on the one hand, and you get the extreme preparation of the site on the other hand. What we do is something in between. The designer will design the thing, then it gets handed over to the factory. They go to site and they check what the designer's done. If there's any discrepancies, they send it back to the designer to change it before anything even gets made. So in other words, if a plumbing point is 10 mils too far and it lands on the edge of a case, we'll get them to move it, or we'll change the design. Designs always change, sizes always change, but I think it's it should not just be left in the hands of the poor salesperson to take the rap for something that is a very dynamic industry. Does that answer it?
Yes, perfectly. Thanks. So I think it was also, it's a phrase that's been mentioned in one of our previous sessions with the guys, is measuring twice, cut once. I think that definitely explains it, and I think the teamwork is essential there. Bo, this question is for you, and with regards to sprayed, Duco sprayed doors, specifically with the plunge routed handles or the reverse chamfer. So we have a lot of queries or complaints that come through to us from clients, and this one's geared mainly at the ladies, in that they found that lots of scratches in those grooves with the painted finish. How do you tactfully warn a client about it with their acrylic nails or chunky jewelry? Is there something that you would suggest they use instead of that? Would you gear them away from it, or would you just tell them how to care for it? What are the options available there?
Yeah, very tricky situation, because I think we've all been there. A lot of people, in terms of the finger grips or the reverse chamfer, or how the kitchen's being used, whether it's by themselves personally, or whether they have assistants in the house, the biggest challenge is trying to figure out what is happening in that kitchen, and are they aware or are they not aware of what is happening, where they're potentially washing or when they are potentially taking out the bin, and how these things are being used, or how the various bits of hardware are being utilized, or whether they go to bed at night and their finger grips are full of water and sitting there overnight, soaking up all the potential elements. Generally, it's going to come down to, for us, we use a very high quality paint. We use high body primers, and at the moment we are still on a catalyst-based paint with thinners, and we add hardener to that as well. We find that every time we spray a coat on the on your two flat faces of the door, we generally spray the edges again. So your edges will generally get the double the amount of coats as your two flat faces of your joinery does. Sometimes it does happen that these finger grips are damaged and things like that. I think that's just going to come down to your relationship with your client and whether or not you are going to take it back and respray it, or whether or not you're going to put up a fuss. But it is incredibly challenging dealing with nails, dealing with jewelry. Sometimes people are renting accommodation out. They've got sometimes have chefs in their kitchens, and stuff is being manhandled, so to speak, in a way that is not quite desirable for a typical Ducode format type kitchen.
Thanks. Then I don't know who would like to answer this one. It's up to you. So we were chatting about the door styles, and one of the biggest things is that quite often, specifically with when somebody's quoting on solid timber, they'll list, if they itemize their finishes, they'll say it's a solid timber door, and then sometimes we get called to site and they go, well, they've got a shaker flat panel, and they were under the impression that the solid panel is the center panel is solid timber. How do you, what material do you use first of all, and how do you work around that? Is there a different wording that they need to use? And what kind of grain variation is there allowed in the product compared to the outer solid frame and the center panel?
Andy, I'm happy to answer if you want.
Just say something and then you can answer the body.
Sure.
We've been there, we've done that, I'm sure you have as well. And I think it's got to do with itemizing in the quote and making everything clear right from the beginning, whether it's a veneer panel and a solid frame. You carry on, bro.
Yeah. So generally, like Andy's saying, we would specify that as a semi-solid shaker door, not just a solid shaker door. In terms of having the option of that center recessed panel being a solid timber, it is definitely doable. Not that desirable to have it in a 6 or 9 millimeter. We would generally have to run some rebates, and you need to allow for movement. So if you had to look at the back of the door, there is sometimes a rebate in the door to allow for that center panel to expand and contract. The biggest challenge that you're going to get is when you are applying your finishes to your solids and your veneers, whether you're staining it. Often your solids suck up that stain a lot more than what your veneers do, and you tend to end up with a big color difference. The veneers as well as the solids will also age differently. It definitely needs to be worded to your client that whether it's a full solid with that shaker panel being solid, semi-solid, I mean, nice to have if a client's worried about moisture or anything like that, that recessed panel can potentially be upgraded to a birch ply or marine ply and then veneered over that. Or the only other option is then to give the client, if you specify solid, it should be solid, in my mind, as a 5P shaker.
Perfect, thank you. And then still sticking along the timber side, veneer components. So say a client is doing bedroom cupboards, tall units, and there's maybe 2 different walls that the units are going on, long, tall doors. What allowance or what degree of variation could be allowed for in terms of the grain or a slight coloring difference? I mean, I know we all have to bear in mind that it's still a solid timber, but how much variation would you allow in the grain and color from maybe doors directly next to each other, or one set of units on the one side and set of units on the opposite wall? What in your mind would be acceptable?
No for us, no color variance, because all the doors will have been veneered at the same time by the same company, Veneercraft, using the same Fletcher veneer. So there shouldn't be any. What does happen sometimes is if one of the doors gets damaged for whatever reason, and then it needs to get re-veneered, that's where you get problems. So it's a sort of intractable problem. It's a bit like Bo said, when you try to fix a Duco sprayed door, the color's always different, so often you have to redo the whole run again, and that's happened as well. But if you press them all at the same time, you're guaranteed of the same continuity, but it's what happens after that that does cause the variation.
Andy, I think that that speaks for the veneer over edge doors, and generally, should we have a big project that comes in, we would contact our supplier, like a company like Veneercraft, and we'd actually ask them to reserve 250 to 300 square meters of a particular bull, all those leaves to one side, and then we would say, keep this for that particular job, so that they know every time that job came in, they would use that particular veneer. That veneer does change as you start working your way through the bull. I mean, the grain changes and things like that. Sometimes we do tend to get client sign off. The biggest challenge, Andy, is when you get your stock standard cut and edge boards. If your kitchen company or your joiner is really aware of this type of thing, he would need to go through to the board supplier. Often what happens is, if you have a stack of 25 veneered boards, you'd ask your board supplier to open up that stack, and you would choose 10 to 12 boards, however big the job is, and you would need to ensure that that grain is all pressed out of the same batch and put to one side. It does get a little bit challenging if your job is bigger than what is available from the potential supplier. If you do have enough lead time, you can ask for more boards to be pressed out of a certain batch, so that you have these kinds of things. But yeah, they should be aware of this. If it's just a case that you're placing an order with a cutting edge board supplier that's doing your veneer for you, this is the type of big problem that you will have. I think you only make that mistake once and don't get paid once, and you tend to give it a little bit more TLC.
Thanks for that. Then, Andy, maybe you can answer this one. Completely waterproof product. Is there such a thing available for our industry?
Yes, it's called paper stone. It's basically layers of paper that have been impregnated in a resin, and it's made in the USA. It's horribly difficult to deal with. We often use it for counter surfaces. For carcasses, not so much. It's very brittle, it's very dense, it's very heavy. And it's used as exterior cladding. So that is an option. It's not a great option for what we do. We have made doors out of it. It's desperately difficult to work with, but it is completely water impervious. I have never found a completely waterproof product for the components that we need, carcasses, doors, and things like that. But I think with careful and clever design and using whatever waterproof or rather water-resistant products they are, you can go a long way towards mitigating damage, which water does create a lot of damage. The other thing, obviously, is you could use teak or Iroko, which are water-resistant timbers, with everything else that entails for solid wood carcassing and so on and so forth, as that's been discussed. I don't think any of the foam-based products would work. It's very difficult in our industry if your core of your substrate is hollow, or it's soft, or it's foam, because everything needs to attach to that. So they are completely waterproof hybrid foam core based products with high pressure laminates on it. But again, then it's a case of the adhesives and glues that attach to that. So difficult question. I hope I've answered it sufficiently.
Perfect. So it is out there, but it's not ideal. And our engineer clients that come forward requesting it, we've at least got a good answer for them.
Sorry to interrupt, Karen. The only other one to use is possibly a Korean or a Staron, should I say? Again, incredibly expensive, but it'll do the trick.
Yeah, well, the paper stone is basically a version of Korea.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I think just lastly, sorry, Steph, I've dominated this a little bit, but a lot of the salespeople, especially when it comes to a new build or a development, you're under pressure from the builder. They may have been delayed on site with rain or product delays, anything like that. And on your case, you need to get that kitchen and carcass in there quick. They need to get their next draw from the bank or whatever. And you're under pressure to put a kitchen in or units into an environment that's not exactly desirable. What is the bare minimum in terms of a new build? What is required in order to be able to get those carcasses in where they're not going to get damaged? What would you think? What would you say is the bare minimum that needs to be in place within that new build in order for that to happen?
Go for it, Bo. You first.
So I would generally specify that you would want a finished floor. We would want at least all your plumbing points and electrical points in position. From a ceiling point of view, we would want the ceiling to be skimmed and, if anything, primed, or in an ideal world, finish painted. All walls need to be plastered, skimmed, and at least base coated. So yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, and obviously windows and doors have to be in. That's not negotiable. So that would be what we would want as a bare minimum. Sometimes it does get challenging. Like I said, builders want to take their next draws, and a lot of the time it hinges on the first fix of the cabinetry being installed.
I just got something to say on that, and that we don't do first fix, second fix. We used to. We stopped that 10 years ago. So we only do one fix. So for our requirements, it's basically kind of what Bo said, but it has to be finished, you know. So from a project development point of view, we try and decouple our installation from the overall finance, because we don't do large residential hotels and things like that. So we come in, the doors are on, the drawers are hanging, and we fit all our components together like a bunch of Lego blocks, and they put the counters on, and then we leave, and then we're done. You know, so it's not a return view, but that's just different ways of managing the installation process. So we have to come back right at the end.
And we often get blamed for delaying the whole project just because we're the last person to be in there.
Always.
But anyway, thank you very much. That's it for me, Steph.
Thanks, Karen. So I've just got two quick questions to bring us to an end. Just Andy, when you were speaking about the carcasses, you mentioned how important it is to work from the appliances as a start point, and how important the ventilation is, whether that be oven ventilation, whether it be for integrated fridges, even if it's a surround for a freestanding fridge and you are semi-building it in. What are the implications for getting that wrong? We often get called out to site where the kitchen company has put in their job, but they actually have not allowed for any ventilation for appliances. What are the repercussions of forgetting that or getting it wrong?
Okay, before I answer that, I'll tell you my very first mistake. This was about 15 years ago. We did a kitchen, and the client gave us a microwave to install. It was a semi-freestanding microwave in a little spot where there was enough ventilation. And then they called us back and said the microwave has blown off, has blown. And so we went there and pulled it out. And what we'd neglected to do, there was like a cling wrap, a foil wrap on the back. And it was a Siemens microwave, and we neglected to peel the stuff off. And so it actually was our fault, even though we didn't buy it. So if you don't design and install your kitchens or your cabinetry with appliances in mind, and exactly as the manufacturers have said you should. Basically, the appliances burn out. Fridges, integrated fridges especially, you know, they'll work for a little while and then they overheat and then they stop working. Similarly with the ovens. And it can get quite costly because it's ultimately the cabinet maker's responsibility to create the housing for these expensive appliances. And if you haven't done that, then you're liable for replacement. And I mean, a Gaggenau fridge is 100,000 Rand or more, 150,000 Rand. That's very expensive. It's quite motivating to get it right and to do it exactly as they said. So basically, you'll reduce the lifespan of the appliance. If you don't fit it properly, the appliance's guarantee is null and void. So there can be quite stringent economic consequences to getting it wrong.
Thanks, Andy. And Bo, just the last question for you. Before we actually got going on the session, we were just quickly mentioning the green kitchen. And obviously, I know a lot of students focus on sustainability and green product, etc. But for the average consumer, how realistic is it to have a green kitchen? I mean, cost-wise.
Yeah, Steph, I think we get a lot of inquiries on green kitchens, and that we generally our South African melamines have generally got an MBS, have generally got a slightly higher formaldehyde content in them, and so they're not really EU-based so-called boards. So your options are the likes of a bamboo board or some of the EU boards that get brought in. Offer a slightly better green certification, so to speak, as well as like the Corian and Starin and the likes of. But the biggest challenge is the costs involved in these higher spec items. A bamboo board versus a melamine board will cost you 6 to 7 times as a thumbsuck more expensive than a melamine cabinet. So what ends up happening when it comes down to the joinery budget, the client tends to, as the build goes on, things start getting a little bit more expensive. The budget just isn't quite there, and unfortunately, the joinery budget takes a knock, and what ends up giving is how green can we get this kitchen? You know, we can still go with the engineered worktops, and a lot of our hardware suppliers and things like that have the various certifications for their factories and carbon footprints and all of those kinds of things. So that's all great. However, when it comes down to the actual board and substructure of the actual carcasses and doors, unfortunately, it just gets incredibly expensive. And the reality or the perception of what that cost is and what it actually is often so skewed, and it can't be justified by the client to actually go that route.
Thanks, Bo. I think, yeah, that's kind of that was my last question. So it brings us to a close. And Andy, Bo, thank you so much for your time. I know that you've taken time out of your workday to join us and given a lot of really useful information and advice. So thanks very much for your time, and best of luck for the rest of your week.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.